The wind howled through the desolate valley, carving through the jagged alien cliffs like a hungry predator. A thick haze of purple dust clung to the rocky landscape, shifting with each gust, hiding dangers in its embrace. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of artillery fire rumbled like an angry god beating his war drum. The warfront on Vortalis 7 was a meat grinder, and every soldier who stepped onto this cursed rock knew that survival was a roll of the dice. "Look at this thing. Are you serious?" The towering figure of Captain Jula Karash held up the human rifle between two clawed fingers, inspecting it with barely concealed amusement. He was a Rylothian, a species known for their thick, scaled hides and brutal strength. The rifle looked like a toy in his grasp, its sleek black frame unimpressive next to the massive plasma blasters slung over his shoulders. "You call this a weapon?" Jula sneered, turning to his squad. The other galactic soldiers burst into laughter, their voices a cacophony of deep growls, high-pitched chirps, and guttural hissing. The combined forces of the coalition, composed of Rylothians, Zyraxians, and the insectoid Drexi, had long dismissed humans as an inferior species, their primitive ballistics a relic compared to energy-based weaponry. "It's so crude," a Zyraxian soldier added, their insectoid mandibles clicking in amusement. "Where's the plasma core? The particle acceleration chamber? It doesn't even have a heat sink." The soldiers continued mocking the rifle, tossing it between them like a novelty item found on a scavenging trip. One even pointed it at the sky and squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack echoed through the valley as a bullet shot out at supersonic speed, vanishing into the distance. Jula snorted. "Ha! It even makes a pathetic little noise." They all laughed again, unaware that, hidden in the distant ridges, a human sniper had just adjusted his scope. Sergeant Matt Callahan exhaled slowly, steadying his aim. Through his scope, he watched the arrogant aliens flaunt his rifle, their laughter grating against his ears. They thought they were invincible, that their shields and energy weapons made them untouchable. They had no idea what they had just walked into. "Arrogant bastards," Callahan muttered under his breath. His ghillie suit blended perfectly with the rocky terrain, the fabric coated in a fine layer of Vortalis dust. His position was perfect, high ground, a narrow pass below, and plenty of cover. He had spent the last 6 hours waiting for the enemy to make a mistake, and now, they were practically gift-wrapping it for him. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, a modified M98 Gauss sniper system, custom-tuned for extreme long-range kills. Unlike the bulky energy weapons favored by the Coalition, this rifle didn't need a glowing charge core or fancy heat sinks. It was a masterpiece of human engineering, designed for one purpose: killing. Down below, Jula and his squad continued their mockery. "Honestly," Jula said, shaking his head, "it's a miracle the humans haven't wiped themselves out yet with this kind of—" His sentence was cut short. Crack. Jula's head snapped back, a fine mist of purple spraying from the exit wound as his body crumpled to the ground. Silence. The entire squad froze, staring in shock at their fallen captain. A single shot. No warning. No glowing energy bolt. No crackling plasma burst. Just an invisible death that arrived faster than sound itself. The Zyraxian who had been holding the rifle dropped it as if it had suddenly become cursed. "Sniper!" someone shouted, their voice tinged with panic. The squad immediately scattered, diving for cover, but it was already too late. Crack. Another soldier fell, a hole punched cleanly through his helmet. The survivors desperately scanned their surroundings, but they couldn't see where the shots were coming from. Their species had trained for energy combat, bright flashes, obvious heat signatures, the back-and-forth exchange of glowing death. But this? This was something else entirely. They were being hunted by a ghost. Callahan worked methodically, his breathing controlled, his movements efficient. His rifle barely made a sound, and each bullet was a whisper of doom, striking with pinpoint accuracy. A Drexi soldier, his chitinous armor gleaming in the pale light, huddled behind a rock. His antennae twitched wildly, trying to detect an energy signature. There was nothing. Crack. A bullet punched through the rock and into his skull. The remaining survivors, once confident, laughing warriors, were now frantic. Their training had not prepared them for this. They had laughed at the humans' primitive weapons. They had assumed superiority. They were wrong. One soldier activated his comms, his voice shaking. "Command! We're under fire. Enemy sniper. We need immediate evac." Crack. The signal cut off as the soldier's body slumped over. Only two were left. A Zyraxian and a Rylothian. The former was trembling, his carapace clicking together from fear. The latter gritted his fanged teeth, gripping his plasma rifle tight. We should fall back," the Zyraxian stammered. "No," the Rylothian snarled. "We hold our ground." He peeked out from behind cover, scanning the ridgeline. He saw nothing but dust and rock. And then, a glint. It was less than a second. A reflection off a scope, barely perceptible in the haze. The Rylothian's instinct screamed. He fired his plasma rifle wildly in the direction of the glint, the bolts scorching the rock face. The recoil made his arm shake, but he kept firing, desperate to hit something, anything. Callahan smirked. Too late. Crack. The Rylothian's body hit the ground, his chest punched through with a single, clean shot. The last survivor, the Zyraxian, was hyperventilating. He curled into himself, antennae pressed flat, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. He knew he was next. He knew there was no escape. Callahan chambered his last round, lining up the final shot. Through his scope, he could see the raw terror in the Zyraxian's face. The insectoid soldier's mandibles twitched, whispering something, maybe a prayer, maybe a plea. It didn't matter. Crack. Silence fell once more. Callahan exhaled, lowering his rifle. The entire enemy squad lay motionless, their bodies sprawled across the valley floor. What had started as a joke, a squad of overconfident aliens mocking human weapons, had turned into a massacre. Slowly, methodically, Callahan packed up his gear. He had no intention of staying in one spot for too long. The Coalition would come looking for their lost patrol soon, and he needed to move. As he slung his rifle over his shoulder, he muttered under his breath, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. "Mock us all you want." He vanished into the mist. But never underestimate a human with a gun. The Coalition's command outpost on Vortalis 7 was a fortress of steel and energy shields, pulsating with alien technology. Deep in its heart, surrounded by holographic displays and the faint hum of power cores, stood High Commander Zyratel, a towering Zyraxian with a hardened exoskeleton, his mandibles twitching with irritation. The outpost had gone eerily silent for the past hour. Jula Karesh's squad was overdue for their scheduled report. That alone was cause for concern, but then came the distress signal, cut off mid-sentence. No confirmation of enemy contact, no response from his men. Just silence. His many eyes shifted to the holographic projection of Vortalis rocky terrain, scanning for anomalies. The last known coordinates of Jula's squad flickered in the display, a deep valley, surrounded by jagged ridges. The kind of place a smart predator would pick for an ambush. A Drexy officer clicked his mandibles, the chitinous plates of his carapace shifting. "Shall I dispatch a drone to investigate, High Commander?" Zyratel flexed his claws, a slow, deliberate motion. The last thing he needed was to lose more warriors to human trickery. "No. We deploy a full recon unit. If this is an enemy strike, I want them crushed before they can retreat." The order was given. Within minutes, a squad of elite Coalition soldiers mobilized, their hovercrafts roaring to life as they sped across the barren landscape. ***. Callahan was already on the move, weaving through the uneven terrain like a shadow. His boots left barely a trace on the dust-covered rocks, his movements practiced and precise. He had no illusions about his situation, he had just wiped out an entire Coalition squad. That meant retaliation was inevitable. The enemy was overconfident, but not stupid. They would send scouts. Maybe a full squad. Maybe more. The Coalition didn't take casualties lightly, and they damn sure didn't tolerate humiliation. He reached a new vantage point, an elevated position overlooking the valley where the bodies of Jula's squad still lay in the dust. From here, He had a clear view of the incoming coalition reinforcements, 3 hovercrafts, sleek and angular, their repulsor engines humming as they skimmed just above the rocky terrain. Callahan counted at least 15 soldiers. Well-armed, armored, moving in tight formation. These weren't the overconfident grunts from before. These were professional killers. He settled into position, adjusting his rifle's scope. He had one chance to turn this into a slaughterhouse before they got wise to his location. He slowed his breathing, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. Crack. The lead hovercraft's pilot never saw it coming. One moment, he was gripping the controls, scanning the landscape for threats. The next, his skull exploded in a fine mist. The hovercraft jerked violently to the side before slamming into a jagged outcrop, shattering into a fireball. The coalition soldiers barely had time to react. Crack. A second shot. A Rylothian commando crumpled mid-stride, his energy rifle clattering against the rocks. Panic spread through the squad. They dove for cover, barking orders in their respective tongues, trying to pinpoint the sniper's location. Callahan smirked. They were falling into the same trap. He shifted position, crawling along the ridge like a ghost. Unlike energy weapons, his sniper rifle didn't give off a visible firing signature. No glowing projectiles. No plasma bursts. Just death from the shadows. He lined up another shot. Crack. A Drexy officer collapsed, his exoskeleton punctured by the supersonic round. The remaining soldiers finally responded, launching suppressive fire in his general direction. Bright streaks of plasma seared through the air, hammering the rocks where they thought he was hiding. But Callahan had already moved. This was the beauty of human weaponry. No energy emissions. No heat trails. Just raw, kinetic destruction. The coalition's advanced sensors were practically useless against him. He reached a new firing position, peered through his scope. His stomach tightened. The surviving soldiers weren't retreating. Instead, they were adapting. The Zyraxian squad leader, a seasoned veteran judging by the scars on his carapace, had stopped relying on scanners. Instead, he was using something more primal. His mandibles twitched, his multifaceted eyes scanning the terrain. He was listening for movement, watching for dust displacement. Callahan cursed under his breath. This one was smart. The Zyraxian suddenly raised a claw, signaling to his remaining men. They stopped firing blindly. Their movements became careful, deliberate. They weren't panicking anymore. They were hunting him. He barely had time to shift before a plasma bolt vaporized the rock next to his head. Shit. Callahan rolled down the ridge, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy fire. His camouflage was useless now, they had locked onto his general position. He sprinted for cover, his rifle slung over his back as he darted through the uneven terrain. A loud, insectoid screech echoed behind him. The Zyraxian squad leader had seen him. Callahan knew he had to act fast. Snipers weren't meant for prolonged engagements. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and exposed. He needed to level the playing field. He yanked a small device from his belt, a detonation beacon. He slapped it onto a nearby rock face and kept running. The moment he reached cover, he activated the detonator. A deafening boom tore through the valley as the rock face exploded, sending a cascade of boulders crashing down onto the enemy squad. Dust and debris filled the air, obscuring everything in a thick, suffocating haze. Callahan didn't waste time. He switched to his sidearm, a heavily modified .50 caliber revolver, a relic from Earth but still more than capable of putting down anything that got too close. A shadow moved in the dust. He raised his weapon. A massive figure lunged at him. The Zyraxian leader had survived the rockslide. His chitinous armor was cracked, bleeding from multiple wounds, but he was still fast. Too fast. Callahan barely got a shot off before the alien slammed into him, sending him sprawling. His revolver skittered across the ground. The Zyraxian loomed over him, mandibles clicking in a mixture of rage and triumph. "You think you are the predator," the alien hissed, voice distorted through a translator. "You are nothing but prey." Callahan grinned, despite the pain lancing through his ribs. "Yeah." He coughed. "Then why are your boys all dead?" The Zyraxian roared and lunged, claws poised to tear him apart. Callahan reacted on instinct. His hands shot to his belt, yanking free his combat knife, a wicked, serrated piece of human craftsmanship. As the Zyraxian came down, Callahan twisted, driving the blade straight into the alien's throat. A wet gurgle escaped the alien's mandibles. Callahan shoved him off, wrenching the knife free as the Zyraxian collapsed, twitching in his death throes. Silence. Heavy, gasping silence. Callahan wiped the blood off his knife, retrieving his revolver. He scanned the valley. The enemy squad was gone, either crushed by the rockslide or taken down by his rifle. He exhaled, letting the adrenaline settle. Then, his radio crackled. A voice, gravelly, urgent. "Sergeant Callahan. Report." He pressed the comms button. "Still kicking, sir." A pause. Then, his commander spoke. "Good. Because you've got bigger problems. Coalition forces are mobilizing. You need to move. Now." Callahan smirked, glancing at the burning wreckage of the enemy hovercrafts. "Let him come." He reloaded his rifle, vanishing into the mist. The hunt wasn't over yet. The night sky over Vortalis 7 was a swirling storm of violet and obsidian, the twin moons casting a ghostly glow over the war-torn landscape. Callahan moved like a phantom through the jagged rock formations, his ghillie suit blending seamlessly with the environment. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the distant echoes of distant artillery fire, an unrelenting reminder that this planet had become a charnel house. He had taken down 2 full squads now. That was enough to send ripples through the Coalition's ranks. They wouldn't just send another squad to investigate. They would send an extermination force. Callahan knelt beside the wreckage of one of the downed hovercrafts, stripping a fallen Drexy soldier of his tactical vest. He grimaced at the feel of the exoskeletal remains beneath his gloves. The vest was heavier than expected, lined with reinforced plates designed to absorb energy weapon fire. Wouldn't stop a bullet worth a damn, but it might keep him from getting completely vaporized by plasma bolts. His radio crackled again. "Callahan, you copy?" The voice was tense. "Lieutenant Graves, his CO. "Copy, Lieutenant. Still breathing." "Not for long if you don't get moving. The Coalition's deploying a full counterattack to your sector." Orbital scans picked up heavy troop movement, Rylothian shock troopers, Zyraxian commandos, and... A pause. "Dreadnought support." Callahan clenched his jaw. That was worse than he expected. "Say again, LT? They're rolling in dreadnoughts." "Confirmed. Heavily shielded, armed with kinetic artillery and plasma cannons. You need to extract, now." Callahan exhaled slowly, adjusting his grip on his rifle. "Negative, sir. If they're sending that much muscle, they're not just here to wipe me out. They're clearing the sector for something." A moment of silence on the comms. Then, "You're thinking the same thing I am." Callahan smirked. "They are prepping for an offensive. Probably a push toward our forward command post." "Makes sense. That means if we stop them here, we slow their entire advance." Callahan scanned the valley, taking in the terrain. If the Coalition was sending heavy armor, they wouldn't take the mountain passes, too narrow. They'd take the valley, pushing through the open ground where their armor could provide maximum support. And if they were expecting a frontal engagement, that meant they wouldn't be looking for one thing: a single sniper waiting in the dark. Callahan's fingers tightened around his rifle. "I can make this valley a killing field." "Damn it, Callahan," Graves sighed. "Fine. If you're going to do something stupid, we'll make sure it counts. We'll relay enemy troop positions from our orbital scans. Just keep them locked down as long as you can." Callahan grinned. "Copy that. Let's see how well they handle a real fight." He moved quickly, setting up charges along the valley pass. They weren't designed for heavy armor, but they'd be enough to disrupt enemy formations, force them to bunch up, make easy targets. He took position on a rocky outcrop, high enough to see the valley below but with enough cover to stay hidden. Then, he waited. The first sign of the enemy was the distant rumble of engines. Then came the lights, blue-white energy running along the hulls of the dreadnoughts as they rumbled forward, flanked by Coalition infantry. A full battalion. Callahan exhaled, steadying his heartbeat. He had to make every shot count. The first target was the Zyraxian field officer, likely the one coordinating the attack. He lined up the shot. Squeezed the trigger. Crack. The officer dropped, his skull perforated before he even knew he was under fire. The moment his body hit the ground, chaos erupted. Coalition soldiers scrambled, barking orders in their alien tongues, seeking cover. Plasma fire sprayed wildly into the cliffs, but Callahan had already relocated, moving deeper into his sniper's nest. He took aim again. Crack. A Rylothian heavy trooper's head snapped back, his body collapsing like a ragdoll. The dreadnoughts began shifting formation, their cannons swiveling toward the cliffs. They still don't know where I am. Good. Callahan grabbed the detonator. With a flick of his thumb. Boom. The valley floor erupted as the charges he had planted detonated in sequence. Fire and debris tore through the enemy ranks, sending bodies flying. A dreadnought's tread slipped, its massive form tilting as it struggled to adjust. Now was the moment. He fired again. Crack. The dreadnought's exposed sensor array shattered. The Coalition's formation was breaking. They weren't prepared for asymmetric warfare, for an enemy they couldn't see. But Callahan knew it wouldn't last. Through his scope, he spotted something, movement on the ridgeline opposite his position. They had found him. A Rylothian strike team, 3 warriors strong, moving fast. Too fast. Callahan barely had time to roll as a plasma bolt seared through his previous position, melting the stone. He scrambled back, drawing his revolver as the first Rylothian came over the ridge. The alien let out a battle cry, raising a heavy plasma blade. Callahan fired. Boom. The revolver's massive slug ripped through the Rylothian's chest, sending him tumbling down the slope. The second one was on him before he could react. A massive, clawed hand grabbed his arm, wrenching him forward. Pain exploded across Callahan's ribs as he was slammed into the ground. His vision blurred. The alien loomed over him, raising its blade for the kill. Callahan twisted, his free hand grabbing a combat knife from his belt. He drove it deep into the Rylothian's side. The alien snarled, staggering back, just enough for Callahan to raise his revolver. He pulled the trigger. Boom. The Rylothian's head snapped back. The body collapsed. He barely had time to recover before the third warrior tackled him. The two rolled down the slope in a tangle of limbs, crashing into the dust. Callahan's grip on his revolver slipped. The Rylothian grabbed his throat, squeezing, eyes burning with fury. "Pathetic human," it growled. "Your weapons are weak, your kind is weak." Callahan gritted his teeth. "Yeah." He reached into his vest and pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade. The Rylothian's eyes widened in horror as Callahan shoved the grenade into his belt. "Then why am I still alive?" He kicked the alien back and dived behind cover. A second later, boom. The explosion sent a shockwave through the valley, the Rylothian's remains scattering into the dust. Callahan panted, pressing a hand to his ribs. They were bruised, maybe cracked. But he wasn't dead. His radio crackled. "Callahan, what the hell was that?" He coughed, spitting blood. "Took care of some houseguests." "You're insane." "Yeah," he muttered, retrieving his rifle. "But it's working." He looked back to the valley. The Coalition's advance had stalled. Their soldiers hesitated. Their dreadnoughts were damaged. And Callahan? He was still breathing. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. The valley was a graveyard of metal and flesh. Fires burned along the ridgeline where Coalition bodies lay scattered, their weapons still glowing from overheated plasma cores. The once mighty dreadnoughts were crippled, their advance halted, their crews scrambling to establish defensive positions. The Coalition had lost momentum. Their soldiers hesitated, their confidence shaken. But Callahan wasn't done yet. He crawled to a better vantage point, biting back the pain in his ribs. He had taken hits, his body screamed in protest, but he was still in the fight. He reloaded his sniper rifle, taking a slow breath. The battle was turning, but if he let up now, the enemy would regroup. And that wasn't an option. His radio crackled. "Callahan, this is Graves. You still kicking?" He smirked despite himself. "Hurt like hell, but yeah. Good. Because the Coalition just called in reinforcements. We're tracking a fast-moving aerial deployment inbound to your position." Callahan's smirk faded. "How many?" "At least a full dropship. Maybe more." He exhaled through his teeth. That was bad. A Coalition dropship meant reinforcements, fresh troops, heavily armed, ready to sweep the battlefield and wipe out whatever resistance was left. If they landed, everything he had done would be undone in an instant. Callahan adjusted his scope. In the distance, over the horizon, he spotted the shimmering lights of the incoming dropship, its massive silhouette cutting through the swirling storm clouds. He had one shot at this. He activated his comms. "LT, I need you to patch me into artillery command. Now." "What are you planning?" Callahan took another deep breath, steadying his aim. "Gonna drop the sky on these bastards." "Standby, patching you through." A moment later, another voice came over the comms, gruff, impatient. "This is Major O'Donnell, Artillery Command. Who the hell am I talking to?" "Sergeant Callahan, forward reckon. I need immediate fire support on my coordinates." "Negative, Sergeant. We've got orders to hold fire, don't want to risk friendly casualties." Callahan gritted his teeth. "Major, if you don't send a strike in the next 2 minutes, we're all dead anyway. Coalition dropship inbound. If they land, they reinforce. If they reinforce, they push forward. And if they push forward, we lose the goddamn sector. You want that on your record?" Silence. Then, "Give me your coordinates." Callahan fed them through. O'Donnell cursed. "Jesus. You're in the middle of that mess? You won't have time to evac before the strike hits." "Don't need to." Callahan adjusted his scope. "Just need them delayed." A pause. Then, over the comms. "Artillery inbound. ETA, 4 to 5 seconds." Callahan exhaled, lining up his final shot. The dropship was closing in, its massive form casting a long shadow over the battlefield. If it landed, he was dead. If it deployed troops, the fight was over. He had to take it out now. His crosshairs found the weakest point. The thruster intake. A perfect shot would ignite the ship's core. A near-perfect shot would cripple it. Either way, it wouldn't be flying for long. Callahan squeezed the trigger. Crack. The bullet tore through the intake. A second later, the dropship lurched, fire spilling from its underbelly. Smoke billowed from the engines as the pilots scrambled to correct their trajectory. They failed. The Coalition dropship spiraled out of control, banking hard before crashing into the valley floor, where it exploded in a deafening fireball. Callahan barely had time to process the destruction before his earpiece flared to life. "Artillery strike incoming. Get to cover." He ran. The first shell hit like a meteor. A thunderous boom tore through the valley, sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. The ground shook, rocks and debris flying in all directions. Then the second shell hit. And the third. Then a full barrage. The sky rained fire. Dreadnoughts were torn apart by kinetic strikes, their reinforced hulls crumpling like paper under the sheer force of the bombardment. Coalition soldiers scattered, their formations shattered. Plasma weapons were useless against brute force destruction. Callahan dove behind a boulder as shrapnel rained down around him. Dust filled the air, turning the battlefield into a swirling storm of chaos. He covered his head, feeling the aftershocks shake his very bones. Then, silence. The bombardment ended. Callahan coughed, pushing himself to his feet. The valley was unrecognizable. What had once been a battlefield was now a smoldering ruin. Fires burned across the wreckage. The Coalition forces were gone, either incinerated or buried beneath the rubble. He activated his comms. "LT, you copy?" "Static." Then, "Jesus, Callahan." He smirked. "Told you I had a plan." A laugh. You crazy son of a bitch. You just won us this fight. Callahan looked down at the valley, at the shattered remains of the enemy forces. A single sniper had held back an entire coalition advance. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same aliens who had mocked human weapons had just been destroyed by one. He exhaled, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. His body ached, his ribs throbbed, but he was still alive. And the war wasn't over. "Send me the next set of coordinates," he said, wiping blood from his chin. "Where do you need me?" A pause. Then, "We'll patch you through." Callahan smirked. The hunt continued.